The dust of New Mexico territory swirled across the main street of Las Animas as Isaac Lawson rode in, a man who carried his solitude like the weathered colt at his hip. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild, untamed, and unforgiving, much like Isaac himself. He had spent 15 years as a drifter, a cowboy who moved from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to call any place home. At 32, the lines on his face told stories of harsh sun, bitter winters, and a heart that had long ago stopped looking for anything beyond the next horizon. The town of Las Animas wasn't much to look at, a collection of wooden buildings with false fronts lining the dusty main street, a small church with a modest steeple, and the usual establishments that kept a frontier town alive. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and the recently built railroad station that connected this remote place to the rest of an expanding America. Isaac dismounted his dun-colored horse outside the saloon, tying it to the hitching post before pushing through the swinging doors. The familiar smells of whiskey, smoke, and unwashed bodies greeted him. This was his church, his communion found at the bottom of a glass rather than in prayer. He'd never been one for faith, not since he'd watched his parents die of fever when he was 14, their prayers unanswered as they slipped away one after the other. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, placing a coin on the counter. His voice was rough from disuse, like he saved words the way other men saved bullets, only spending them when absolutely necessary. "New in town?" the bartender asked, sliding the drink across. Isaac nodded, downing the amber liquid in one swallow. "Looking for work?" "Try the Morgan place," the bartender offered, already refilling Isaac's glass. "Old man Morgan's looking for hands. His daughter's been running things since he took ill, but they're short on men who know cattle." Isaac wasn't sure he wanted to work for a woman, but work was work, and his pockets were nearly empty. "Where's this Morgan place?" 3 miles west. Can't miss it. White house with a red barn. Ask for Miss Grace Kelly. The name meant nothing to Isaac then. How could he know that those 2 simple words would change everything? The next morning, Isaac rode out to the Morgan Ranch. The place was impressive, several hundred acres of good grazing land bordered by mountains to the north and a creek to the south. The white farmhouse stood proud against the landscape, and beside it, as promised, was a large red barn. Several cowboys were working in the corral, breaking horses from the look of it. As Isaac approached, a woman emerged from the house. She wore a practical split riding skirt and a simple blouse, her auburn hair caught up in a loose knot at the nape of her neck. She was perhaps 25, with clear green eyes that assessed him quickly as he dismounted. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying across the yard. "Looking for work," Isaac replied, removing his hat. "Bartender in town said you might be hiring." "I'm Grace Kelly," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, no nonsense. "We lost 2 men to the silver mines last month. Do you know cattle?" "Worked cattle since I was 15, Isaac replied. "Name's Isaac Lawson. Can you break horses, Mr. Lawson?" "Yes, madam." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't need men who'll run off at the first whisper of silver or gold. I need reliable hands who'll stay for the season at least." "I've got nowhere else to be," Isaac said honestly. Grace studied him for a long moment, then nodded. $30 a month plus room and board in the bunkhouse. We work from sunup to sundown, Sundays off unless there's trouble. You can start today." And so Isaac joined the Morgan Ranch, expecting nothing more than honest work and regular pay. The other hand's 3 men named Tom, Frank, and Hector welcomed him without much fuss. They were good men, hard workers who respected Grace Kelly and spoke highly of her father, who was confined to bed most days with a wasting illness that had taken his strength but not his mind. Within a week, Isaac had settled into the rhythm of ranch life. He rose before dawn, worked with the cattle, mended fences, and broke horses. Grace was always there, working alongside the men, never asking anyone to do what she wouldn't do herself. She rode as well as any man Isaac had ever seen, and she knew every inch of the ranch like she'd memorized it. In the evenings, after supper, the men would gather on the bunkhouse porch, smoking and telling stories. Sometimes Grace would join them briefly, discussing the next day's work before retiring to the main house where she cared for her father. "Miss Grace is something else," Tom said one evening as they watched her walk back to the house. "Been running this place for 2 years now, ever since her father took ill. Never complains, never falters." "How'd she end up here?" Isaac asked, surprising himself with his curiosity. "Her folks came from back east when she was just a girl," Frank explained, puffing on his pipe. "Her ma died of cholera about 10 years ago. Since then, it's just been her and her pa." "She turned down 3 marriage proposals," Hector added with a grin. "Including the banker's son and that fancy lawyer from Santa Fe." "Can't blame her," Tom said. "She marries, she loses the ranch. Law says it goes to her husband." Isaac nodded, understanding. A woman like Grace wouldn't surrender her independence easily, especially not to the kind of men who'd see her as nothing more than a path to ownership of a fine piece of land. As the weeks passed, Isaac found himself watching Grace more often. He noticed the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, which wasn't often enough, and the gentle way she spoke to her horses. She was strong but not hard, determined but not cruel. She was unlike any woman he'd ever known. One evening in late August, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. The sky turned an ominous green-black, and the wind picked up, bending the grass in waves across the pasture. The men worked quickly to secure everything and get the most vulnerable animals to shelter. As Isaac was helping to herd the last of the young calves into the barn, he heard a shout. Through the curtain of rain, he saw Grace struggling with the doors of the chicken coop, which were being torn by the wind. Without thinking, he ran to her, helping her secure the doors against the gale. "Thank you," she gasped, rain plastering her hair to her face. "I was afraid we'd lose half the chickens." They made a dash for the barn, arriving soaked to the skin. Inside, it was dim but dry, the storm muffled by the thick walls. The other hands were tending to the nervous animals. "You're bleeding," Isaac said, noticing a cut on Grace's palm where one of the coop's hinges had caught her. "It's nothing," she insisted, but Isaac took her hand anyway, examining the wound in the lantern light. "Might need stitching," he said, his voice oddly gentle. "There's a medical kit in the tack room," she replied, her eyes meeting his. Something passed between them then, something neither had expected. Isaac cleaned the wound carefully, his calloused hands surprisingly delicate. Grace watched him work, noticing for the first time the different shades of brown in his beard, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the concentration in his deep blue eyes. "Where did you learn to stitch a wound like that?" she asked as he finished, wrapping a clean bandage around her palm. "Army doctor showed me during the war," he replied. "Said I had steady hands. You fought in the war," Isaac nodded, tying off the bandage. "Union cavalry. 3 years." "My father, too," she said softly. "He never talks about it." "Most don't," Isaac replied, still holding her hand, the task of bandaging long complete. The barn door burst open, breaking the moment as Hector rushed in. "Miss Grace, it's your pa. He's taken a bad turn." Grace's face drained of color. "Get doctor." "Wilson from town," she ordered, already running toward the door. "Can't," Hector said grimly. Bridge over Walker's Creek is washed out. No way to town till morning at least. Grace looked stricken for just a moment before her determination took over. I'll go to him. Hector, keep an eye on things here. I'll come with you, Isaac said, the words out before he could consider them. They raced through the rain to the house. Inside, Mr. Morgan was feverish, his breathing labored. Grace moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, preparing cool compresses and mixing medicines from bottles on the bedside table. "What can I do?" Isaac asked, feeling strangely helpless. "Talk to him," Grace said, her voice tight with worry. "Keep him present while I prepare this tonic." Isaac approached the bed awkwardly. The old man's eyes were bright with fever, his face gaunt from months of illness. "Mr. Morgan, sir," Isaac began uncertainly. "It's Isaac Lawson. I work for your daughter." The old man's eyes focused briefly. "The new hand," he rasped. "From Virginia?" "Yes, sir," Isaac replied, surprised the man knew anything about him. "Grace says you're a good worker," Morgan managed before a coughing fit overtook him. Isaac helped him sit up slightly, supporting his frail shoulders until the coughing subsided. "Your daughter runs a fine ranch, sir, best I've seen in my travels." A ghost of a smile touched the old man's lips. "She's extraordinary, always was." His eyes drifted closed, his breathing becoming more labored. Grace returned with a cup of medicine, which she helped her father drink. For the next several hours, they took turns cooling his fever and helping him through coughing fits. Outside, the storm raged on, isolating them from any help. Near midnight, Morgan's fever spiked dangerously. His breathing became shallow, and he slipped in and out of consciousness. "He needs a doctor," Grace said, her composure finally cracking as she pressed a fresh, cool cloth to her father's forehead. "The bridge," Isaac began. "I know," she interrupted, her voice breaking. For the first time since he'd met her, Grace Kelly looked truly afraid. "I can't lose him, Isaac. He's all I have." The raw honesty in her voice touched something in Isaac that had been dormant for years. He knew what it was to be alone in the world, and he wouldn't wish that on her. "Tell me what to do," he said simply. Grace looked at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Just stay. Please." And so Isaac stayed through the long night as the storm gradually subsided and Morgan's condition worsened. By dawn, it was clear the old man was failing. His breathing was shallow, and he no longer responded to their voices. Grace sat by the bed, holding her father's hand, her face etched with grief and exhaustion. Isaac stood nearby, feeling the weight of her impending loss as if it were his own. "He's dying," Grace whispered, not looking up. "Just like my mother did, and there's nothing I can do." Isaac moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry." She covered his hand with hers, drawing strength from his presence. "When my mother was dying, she asked my father to pray with her. He did, and it seemed to give her peace. But I don't know how, I never learned." Isaac swallowed hard. "Neither did I," he admitted. The confession felt like revealing a secret weakness. "My parents prayed when they were dying. It didn't save them." Grace looked up at him, understanding in her tired eyes. "Perhaps it's not about being saved. Perhaps it's about not being alone at the end." As the sun rose, Morgan's breathing became more labored. Grace clutched his hand tighter, whispering words of love and reassurance to her father. Isaac stood beside her, a silent support in her darkest hour. When Morgan took his last breath, it was peaceful, a gentle exhale followed by stillness. Grace bent her head over their joined hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Isaac knelt beside her, placing an arm around her trembling form, offering the only comfort he knew how to give, his presence. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The doctor came, too late to help but in time to confirm what they already knew. The town's carpenter built a simple pine coffin, and the preacher spoke words over the grave on a sunny hillside where Mrs. Morgan was also buried. The ranch hands and townspeople came to pay their respects, offering condolences and casseroles, speaking well of a man who had been respected in the community. Through it all, Grace moved like a sleepwalker, accepting sympathies with quiet dignity, her grief held tightly in check. Isaac watched her, concerned. He had seen men break under less pressure, and he worried about what would happen when the neighbors left and the reality of her loss fully hit her. He found himself staying close, taking on extra work around the ranch, making sure she ate and rested when she forgot to do so. A week after the funeral, Isaac found Grace in the barn late at night, sobbing into her horse's mane. He approached quietly, not wanting to intrude on her private grief but unable to walk away. "Grace," he said softly. She straightened immediately, wiping her face. "Isaac, I was just checking on Thunderbolt's leg. He seemed to be favoring it earlier." "Grace," he repeated more gently this time. "You don't have to pretend. Not with me." Something in his voice, perhaps the simple honesty of it, broke through her carefully constructed walls. She turned to him, and the raw pain in her eyes nearly took his breath away. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How to be alone, how to run this place without him." "You're not alone," Isaac said, the words feeling unfamiliar on his tongue. He wasn't a man who made promises easily. "And you've been running this place for 2 years already." "But he was always here," she said. "Even when he couldn't work anymore, I could talk to him, ask his advice. Now there's just silence." Isaac took a step closer. "You have people who care about you. The hands respect you. The town respects you. You're not alone, Grace." She looked at him for a long moment, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Why are you still here, Isaac? You could have moved on after the funeral. Most drifters would have." It was a fair question, one Isaac had been asking himself. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just couldn't leave. Not yet." The truth was more complex than he could articulate. Something had shifted in him the night Morgan died, watching Grace's strength and vulnerability intertwined. He had recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone who understood loss but continued to face each day with courage. Grace seemed to accept his answer, nodding slightly. "Well, I'm grateful you stayed. The work doesn't stop just because." Her voice caught. "Just because hearts are broken," Isaac finished for her. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment they were just two people who understood each other's pain. Two souls who had learned to carry grief without being crushed by it. The moment passed, but something had changed between them. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a comfortable routine. Isaac took on more responsibilities, helping Grace manage the ranch while she dealt with her father's affairs. They often worked side by side, their initial employer-employee dynamic evolving into something more like a partnership. They began to talk more, sharing stories over coffee on the porch after dinner. Isaac learned that Grace had been educated back east before her mother's death brought her home permanently. She had dreams once of becoming a teacher, but the ranch had become her life, and she didn't regret it. In turn, Isaac shared pieces of his past, his childhood in Virginia, his time in the war, his years of drifting. He spoke of places he'd seen and people he'd met, adventures and misadventures alike. He found himself telling her things he'd never told anyone, surprised at how easily the words came when she was listening. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Isaac noticed a change in himself. He no longer thought about moving on when winter came. For the first time in 15 years, he was putting down roots, tentative though they might be. The other hands noticed the change in both of them. Frank commented one evening that Isaac and Grace were circling each other like two cautious wolves, which earned him a playful punch from Tom, but wasn't entirely inaccurate. There was an attraction building between them, an undercurrent of tension that neither seemed ready to acknowledge. Isaac knew he was falling in love with her, but he also knew a woman like Grace deserved better than a drifter with empty pockets and a troubled past. The first snow came early that year, a gentle dusting that transformed the ranch into a winter wonderland overnight. Isaac rose before dawn as usual but paused on the bunkhouse porch, struck by the beauty of the snow-covered landscape in the pale pre-dawn light. The main house stood serene in the distance, smoke curling from the chimney. As he watched, the door opened and Grace emerged, wrapped in a shawl. She walked to the edge of the porch, gazing out at the snow-covered ranch. Even from a distance, Isaac could see the weight of sadness in her posture. This would be her first Christmas without her father. Without consciously deciding to, Isaac found himself walking toward the main house. Grace saw him approaching and waited, her breath visible in the cold air. "Good morning," she said as he reached the porch steps. "Morning," he replied. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she nodded, looking out at the pristine landscape. "My father loved the first snow. He used to wake me up to see it when I was a girl." Isaac climbed the steps to stand beside her. "My mother did the same, said snow made the world clean again, if only for a little while." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered hills. In that peaceful moment, Isaac found himself wanting to reach for her hand but resisted the impulse. "I'm riding into town today," Grace said after a while. "Need to see Mr. Peterson at the bank about some loan papers." Isaac frowned. "Loan papers?" Grace sighed, a small cloud forming in the cold air. "The drought this summer hurt us more than I let on. We lost nearly 30 head to thirst and disease, and with the price of cattle down." She shook her head. "I've had to take out a loan to make it through the winter." "I didn't know things were so tight," Isaac said, concerned. "Is there anything I can do?" "You're already doing it," she assured him. "Your work here has been invaluable. I should have been more careful with our resources. My father would have managed better." "Your father would be proud of how you've handled things," Isaac said firmly. "Don't doubt that." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Isaac. I'll ride into town with you," he offered. "Roads might be slippery with the snow." She looked like she might argue but then nodded. "I'd appreciate the company." They set out after breakfast, bundled against the cold. The ride to Las Animas was peaceful, the world muffled by snow. They talked easily, discussing plans for the cattle, spring planting, and the new colt that had been born the week before. In town, Isaac waited outside while Grace met with the banker. When she emerged, her face was tight with worry. "What is it?" he asked as they mounted their horses. "Mr. Peterson says he can't extend any more credit," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. "We've got until March to repay the current loan or he'll have to foreclose." Isaac felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "That's barely 3 months. How are you supposed to raise that kind of money in winter?" Grace shook her head. "I don't know. Sell some stock maybe, though prices are low right now. Sell some of the land perhaps." "The land your father worked his whole life for." Isaac couldn't keep the outrage from his voice. "There has to be another way." "If you have any suggestions, I'm listening," Grace said, her tone more tired than sharp. They rode in silence for a while, both lost in thought. As they passed the saloon, a commotion spilled out onto the street, 2 men locked in a fierce argument, surrounded by onlookers. $100 says Matthews wins, someone called. "I'll take that bet. Preston's got 20 pounds on him." Isaac pulled up short, an idea forming. "Wait here," he told Grace, dismounting quickly. He approached the crowd, listening as the terms of the wager were laid out. The 2 men would wrestle the following Saturday, with bets being placed all week. The pot was already substantial. Isaac returned to Grace, who was watching curiously. "I think I might have a solution," he said as he remounted. "At least a partial one. Wrestling matches." Grace asked incredulously when he explained. "That's your solution?" "I was a boxer in the army," Isaac explained. "Won most of my fights. If I can get into a few matches, play some strategic bets." "Absolutely not," Grace interrupted. "I won't have you getting beaten to a pulp on my account." "It wouldn't be the first time," Isaac said with a wry smile. "And I'm better than you might think." Grace shook her head firmly. "No, Isaac, I appreciate the thought, but I'll find another way. This is my problem to solve." But Isaac couldn't let it go. The idea had taken hold, and he knew he could win. More importantly, he wanted to help her needed to help her. The ranch meant everything to Grace, and he couldn't stand by and watch her lose it. The next Saturday, while Grace was visiting a neighboring rancher, Isaac rode into town. He entered the makeshift arena behind the saloon, where a sizable crowd had gathered to watch the matches. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and excitement. Isaac approached the organizer, a burly man named Jenkins who owned the saloon. "I'd like to fight," he said simply. Jenkins looked him up and down. "Against who?" "Whoever you've got," Isaac replied confidently. Jenkins laughed. "Well, Matthews just won his match. He's looking pretty pleased with himself. Might be up for another go." Matthews was a blacksmith, 6 feet tall and solid muscle. He stood in the center of the ring, arms raised in victory as the crowd cheered. "Perfect," Isaac said, removing his coat. The match was brutal but quick. Matthews had strength, but Isaac had speed and technique. Within 10 minutes, Matthews was on his back, conceding defeat. The crowd roared, some in approval, others in disappointment as they lost their bets. Isaac walked away with $40, a split lip and bruised ribs. But it was a start. Over the next several weeks, Isaac participated in more fights, carefully hiding his injuries from Grace and the other hands. He claimed his occasional bruises came from breaking a particularly ornery horse or accidents while repairing fences. By mid-January, he had accumulated nearly $200, nowhere near enough to save the ranch, but a significant sum nonetheless. Then came an opportunity he couldn't ignore. A professional fighter was passing through, offering to take on all comers with a purse of $500 to anyone who could beat him. The entry fee was steep, $100, but the potential payoff was too good to pass up. Isaac entered the fight with everything he had. The professional, a man named Sullivan with fists like hammers, was the toughest opponent he'd ever faced. The fight went on for nearly 30 minutes, both men bloodied and exhausted. In the end, Isaac managed to land a decisive blow that sent Sullivan to the ground. The crowd erupted as the referee counted Sullivan out. Isaac had won, but at a cost. His right eye was swollen shut, his lip was split in 2 places, and his ribs felt like they might be cracked. Still, he had the money, $500 plus his entry fee back, bringing his total to just over $600. Combined with what Grace had managed to save and what they might get from selling a few head of cattle, it might be enough to make the loan payment. Isaac rode back to the ranch that night, his body aching but his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He stabled his horse quietly, hoping to slip into the bunkhouse without being seen. "Where have you been?" Grace's voice came from the darkness near the barn door. She stepped into the pool of lantern light, and her eyes widened at the sight of his battered face. "My God, Isaac, what happened to you?" There was no point in lying. "I was fighting," he admitted. "In town." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by anger. "After I specifically asked you not to, you could have been seriously hurt." "I'm fine," he insisted, though his body screamed otherwise. "And I won." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the money. $620. Grace stared at the money, then back at his face. You did this for me, for the ranch, for us, Isaac said, the word slipping out before he could catch it. I mean, I couldn't just watch you lose everything your father built, everything you've worked for. Grace's expression softened. She stepped closer, reaching up to gently touch the bruise on his cheekbone. You're a fool, Isaac Lawson. Probably, he agreed, wincing slightly at her touch. Come to the house, she said. Let me clean you up. In the warm kitchen, Grace tended to his wounds with gentle hands. She cleaned the cuts, applied salve to the bruises, and wrapped his ribs, which she determined were badly bruised but not broken. Neither spoke much, but the silence was comfortable, intimate. As she finished, her fingers lingered on his shoulder. Why did you really do this? She asked softly. Isaac looked into her eyes, finding courage in their warmth. Because I care about you, he said simply. More than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. Grace's breath caught. She was close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Isaac, I know I'm not what you deserve, he continued, the words tumbling out now. I'm just a drifter with nothing to offer but my hands and my heart. But I love you, Grace Kelly. I think I've loved you since that night we sat with your father. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. You have no idea what you are, do you? She asked, her voice tender. You're the most honorable man I've ever known. The kindest, the bravest. And I've been falling in love with you too, though I was afraid to admit it even to myself. Isaac's heart seemed to stop. You love me, in answer. Grace leaned forward and kissed him, careful of his split lip. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then growing in confidence as he responded. When they pulled apart, both were smiling despite the tears in their eyes. Stay, Grace whispered. Not just for the winter, stay for good. Are you proposing to me, Miss Kelly? Isaac asked, his voice rough with emotion. Maybe I am, Mr. Lawson, she replied, her eyes shining. This ranch needs a partner who cares about it as much as I do. And I need a partner who understands me the way you do. Then I accept, Isaac said, drawing her back for another kiss. They were married in the spring after the loan was repaid and the ranch secure once more. The ceremony was simple, held in the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. The entire town turned out, along with ranchers from miles around, all coming to wish well the couple who had faced adversity together and emerged stronger for it. Isaac wore a new suit, and Grace a simple white dress she'd sewn herself. They spoke their vows under a cloudless blue sky, promising to love and support each other through whatever life brought their way. The Morgan Lawson ranch prospered under their joint care. Isaac brought new ideas for breeding stronger cattle, while Grace continued to manage the finances with careful attention. Together, they built something neither could have created alone, not just a successful ranch, but a home filled with love and, eventually, the sounds of children's laughter. Their first child, a son they named John after Grace's father, arrived a year after their wedding. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah. Both children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and the importance of family from parents who adored them and each other. As the years passed, Isaac and Grace faced their share of challenges: droughts, harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices, and the usual trials of family life. But they faced each one together, their bond only strengthening with time. The silent, solitary cowboy who had ridden into Las Animas that dusty day became a respected rancher, a loving husband and father, and an integral part of the community. And though he never became a particularly religious man, Isaac did learn to pray first on the night their son was born, when overwhelming gratitude compelled him to whisper thanks to whatever power had brought Grace into his life. Then again during a terrifying fever that nearly took their daughter, when he found himself on his knees beside the child's bed. Grace's hand in his as they whispered her name to heaven together, begging for her recovery. It was on a warm summer evening, nearly 30 years after Isaac first rode into Las Animas, that he stood beside Grace on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their children were grown now, John running a ranch of his own nearby with his wife and 3 children, Sarah teaching at the school in town and recently engaged to a young doctor. "I was thinking about the day we met," Grace said, her hand warm in his. Time had silvered her auburn hair and etched fine lines around her eyes, but to Isaac, she was as beautiful as ever. "Best day of my life," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Though I didn't know it at the time." Grace laughed, the sound still musical after all these years. "You were so solemn, so closed off. I never imagined you'd be the one to save me." Isaac shook his head. "You had it backwards, Grace. You saved me. I was just drifting through life, not really living at all. You gave me a reason to stay, to build something, to care again." "We saved each other then," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I suppose we did," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch settled into evening, horses nickering softly in the barn, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the windmill turning in the gentle breeze. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked suddenly. "Staying here all these years? You could have seen so many places, had so many adventures." Isaac turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Not for one single moment," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "Everything I ever wanted, everything I ever needed was right here, is right here." Grace smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you, Isaac Lawson." "And I love you, Grace Lawson," he replied, his heart as full as it had been on their wedding day. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell fully over the New Mexico landscape, they went inside together, hand in hand. 2 people who had found in each other not just love, but home, the one thing neither had fully known before finding the other. And in the quiet of their bedroom later that night, Isaac whispered a prayer of gratitude to the God he'd once doubted, for the gift of a love that had healed him and a life more blessed than he'd ever dared to imagine. Their story became something of a legend in Las Animas, the tale of the lonely cowboy and the determined rancher's daughter who built a legacy of love that outlasted them both. Long after they were gone, their descendants would tell of how Isaac Lawson, a man who once didn't know how to pray, found faith through love when he whispered the name of the woman he loved to heaven. And in the cemetery on the hill where John Morgan had been laid to rest so many years before, 2 headstones stood side by side, bearing the names of Isaac and Grace Lawson, united in death as they had been in life, a testament to the enduring power of a love that had transformed them both and created a legacy that would continue for generations to come.